Hello, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone watching us today. My name is Alexandra Kuzmanovic, and today this is a really special session that we are having. I am joined by 10 extraordinary health scientists as WHO has established its first science council that met today for the first time. The reason why WHO has created this council is to advance our scientific work, but also to be better prepared to predict where we need more research and scientific work on health issues. The Science Council is chaired by Dr. Harold Varmus, who is a Nobel Prize winner in 1989 for medicine. And I'm really honored to be joined by him, by Dr. Soumya, our chief scientist, and 9 more scientists from whom you will hear today. As usual, please feel free to ask your questions if you're watching us on Twitter using the hashtag AskWHO. If you're watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, please leave your comments leave your questions via comment section. I'm wishing good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to our scientists as they are all over the world. And I would like to ask Dr. Soumya and Dr. Harold, the chair of the council, what is the objective of the council and how did the first meeting today go? What will be your first tasks?
Thank you, Alex, and greetings to everyone from WHO. As you know, that science has never been so critical for addressing challenges to global health as we've seen in the past year. From the sequencing that first described this new virus, this new pathogen, to the development of diagnostic tests, as well as vaccines that are now saving lives around the world, it is science that has actually provided the solutions for us. The world has many more challenges that we have to face in terms of our health issues. And WHO is in a very unique position, being with 194 member states and having this tremendous and unique advantage of being able to convene the world's experts. And that's what we see today as well. We've got the world's top experts in different areas coming together to form the Science Council to advise the Director General and advise WHO in a few key areas. So it was really thought of as part of the transformation of WHO that started in 2018 as a way of making us really fit for purpose, fit for the future, looking ahead, responsive to needs, harnessing the advances in science and technology for public good, for public health, and being ahead of the curve. These are some of the thoughts that Dr. Tedros had when he set up the science division, the position of the chief scientist, and then we've created the Science Council to really advise the organization on what are those cutting edge technologies, what do we need to be aware of in the coming years, in the next 5 to 10 years, that can have big impacts on our health, whether it's on prevention or whether it's on diagnosis or treatment of diseases. So just to summarize the goals of why this council has been appointed and what we expect from them, they will evaluate high priority scientific issues and provide input and guidance on translating them to public health guidelines. So we want to link science and public health very closely. Secondly, to identify the emerging areas in science and technology that we need to address, which include global health threats. Of course, all of us are thinking about the pandemic, but there are other global health threats that we need to think about that will have an impact in the future on our health. Thirdly, to provide strategic direction to WHO's work in science, research, and innovation. And that's very much part of our DNA. It's part of our constitution when we were created in 1948. And fourthly, to participate as needed in the review of WHO's normative products. All the guidelines and standards that we produce would benefit from the advice that these top global experts provide to us. And I want to quote what Dr. Tedros said earlier when he was addressing the council that just met in the afternoon here. Of course, we met virtually and people have connected from different parts. And I'm grateful that some have got up extremely early in the morning and some have stayed up late in the evening to be with us. Louis Pasteur once said, "Science knows no country because knowledge belongs to humanity and is the torch which illuminates the world." So the goal here is to harness that knowledge and to harness the best minds to advise us on the future. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Harold Varmus to maybe say a little bit about the first meeting today and the direction in which the council is going.
Well, thank you, Soumya. And I think I speak for all of my colleagues when I say how delighted and honored we are to have been invited to participate in this council. The council we see as encapsulating a very important theme, that is that science not only knows no national boundaries, it doesn't respect disciplinary boundaries either. And in this case, we see that the kinds of observations we can make about the progress of science can be applied to all forms of health and disease. And we're cognizant of Dr. Tedros's interest in improving the health of billions of people by improving the way they live, healthy habits, and bringing science to the fight against disease that affects people throughout the world in many different forms. So we see ourselves as people who have our own set of expertise in different parts of science, bringing those aspects of science to bear on a wide variety of problems. We spent our first meeting in a very congenial conversation about how we can be of help to the World Health Organization and to people who live in the 194 countries represented by the WHO. In particular, we focused most of our conversation on the role that the genomic technologies, the study of our genetic blueprint and how that blueprint is exercised in development and disease, to think about how we might not simply advance the technologies, but to use those technologies in productive and helpful ways to try to achieve some of the goals that Dr. Tedros is trying to achieve in his billion times 3 initiative. We focused particularly on the application of genomic methods in the context of the pandemic, but we also kept in mind and emphasized as well the prospect for improving our ability to cope with many other diseases, cancers, other chronic diseases, other kinds of infectious diseases, in a way that makes equitable use of the knowledge that science has generated. All of us on this council have been trained in some specialty of science, and many of us have done that with the hope that the fruits of science would be enjoyed by all who inhabit this planet. Yet we know that the distribution of the products of science have not been equitable. And we are thinking by taking on a project that addresses the means for better use, better access to the techniques of modern genomics for people who suffer from a wide range of hereditary, infectious, chronic diseases, as well as the current pandemic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soumya and Dr. Harold. Dr. Harold just mentioned genomics as one of area of work that is potentially huge. We have Dr. Edith, who is a molecular biology expert. We have Dr. Mary Claire, who is genome science and medicine expert. And we have Dr. Yong Youth, who is genetic engineer and biotechnology expert. So maybe one of you could tell us more, how can genomics particularly improve lives of people in all countries around the world, and some examples of disease or conditions that could be cured or prevented using those technologies?
Maybe Edith, you could come in.
Yes, okay, sorry, yes. Thank you for that question. I think my other colleagues as well could definitely say a few words. I mean, in terms of genomics, I think, basically the pandemic has really shown us how important this has been. How can we know what the virus is about, how it's evolving, how it's being transmitted in different contexts. And I think that, the infectious disease is clearly one area where genomics is absolutely central, and developing ways to be able to share the data as quickly as possible. So we're sharing knowledge and actually acting on it from a societal and clinical perspective. So I think the pandemic has been a real eye-opener for the power of genomics. But before that, for example, in cancer, it's been transformational. And maybe I can ask Mary Claire to say a few words about that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edith. Dr. Mary Claire, do you hear us?
Don't think she's on the call, but let me pitch in here if I may. So our understanding of cancer over the last 50 years or so has been, as Edith was saying, has been transformed by our understanding that at the core of cancer is a genetic set of genetic changes that alter the behavior of cells. And without going into detail, it's not extravagant to say that the way we diagnose cancer, a responsibility that WHO has held over the years, the way we categorize cancers is now increasingly based on the genetic changes that are found in cancer cells. New therapies, means of prevention are based on genetic risk factors and on the actual mutations that are found. Our understanding of how the immune system responds to cancer is based on our recognition of the changes and the multiplicity of changes that are found in cancer cells. So that's one example of a chronic disease that in which our ability to reduce risk, increase prevention, improve therapy, even in the absence of a complete cure, can be assisted dramatically by the application of genomics. But we know that genomics is not applied with equal efficiency and access in all parts of the world. And one of the things that our group hopes to do is to think about ways in which the access to these new technologies can be improved by improving the technologies, making them less expensive, and improving the workforce that uses them in developing countries.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edith and Dr. Harold. What can this council do to provide guidance that will bring application of these technologies forward in an equitable way? Maybe Dr. Young-Youth would like to take this one.
Can you repeat the question, please?
What can this council do to provide guidance that will bring application of these technologies forward in an equitable way?
Well, the council can really kind of think about means that the genomics and other sciences, can be used to fight diseases like this pandemic, and vaccines, diagnostics, and drugs that can be come from use of genomics technology, and not just genomics, but also other technologies that are available from science. Also emergency medicine and other areas which are impacted by the disease, also really need a lot of science. We can see from the example of vaccines that they can be developed very quickly, showing that science can help solve new problems, provided that enough of background knowledge is available. So I think that other areas as well, and not just genomics and medical science, other areas like IT and online communication and so on, they should help in predicting new pandemics in the future and solving the present pandemics. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would maybe anyone else like to add anything about equitable access to new technologies to improve people's lives? And there was a question that we received about how countries and civil societies can help us in making science and technology more accessible to people.
Perhaps I'll jump in here, Alex, just to say that it's quite important that as we look at new technologies, that it's not just the applications of those technologies, but we need to move towards a situation of equitable involvement in development. So the research and development that goes into it needs also to be equitably distributed. We've seen how, for example, in the pandemic, that Africa was pushed to the back of the queue because the technologies were not there. The ability to manufacture vaccines was not available in Africa. So we've got to address that. And I think it's part of a broader issue that we've got to be developing the ability to develop, use, and apply technologies across the board in a manner that's equitable. And the Africa, the lower and middle income countries need to be part and parcel of developing that capability further.
Maybe I can ask Dr. Pap to come in, because he's had this amazing experience in Haiti when he first went back, and he found such a high mortality just from diarrhea in young children. So things that are people don't die of anymore in the developed world and yet kill, millions of children and adults in the developing world. How can we use science and understanding of disease, Bill, to address some of these big public health challenges?
Yeah, I think this is very important because it's called, in a way, implementation science. In Haiti, for instance, a lot of kids were dying because they were dehydrated. And by bringing oral rehydration fluids, we were able to reverse that situation totally by bringing down the overall national mortality to 50% of what it was. So this is very, very important. The same for tuberculosis. There are new diagnostic tests, molecular biology tests. A gene expert, for instance, the diagnosis that could take 2 months now takes 1 hour and a half. And you're diagnosing also the most resistant, difficult to treat type of tuberculosis. So I think what we need essentially is to offer more capacity building in terms of laboratory, staff training, and resources to developing countries so that they can achieve the same type of results that you see in developed countries.
Thank you so much. And we have also Professor Adiba, who would like to supplement on this question.
Yeah, I just want to support what Bill and Slim have said around making sure that this new technology not only are accessible, but we're part of the development of that. And for that to happen, there needs to be capacity building. And I think the role of the Science Council would be, I guess, first of all, to identify where the gaps are and provide a global framework on how we can rapidly build this capacity. I think WHO has established a very exciting new institute, of which I'm also a part of, the WHO Academy, whose role is to build capacity all over the world. And I think we can perhaps look at some synergy there, Soumya, for some of the things that we've tried to do.
Thank you so much, Professor. How Dr. Slim mentioned some applications for COVID-19 pandemic. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how has science contributed so far to the pandemic response, and what are the lessons from some scientific experiences in epidemic crisis before that were very helpful in this pandemic? Dr. Slim, would you like to start?
Yeah, perhaps I'll just use 3 examples. So it's because of our preparatory activities and all of the work that had been done to expand the availability of diagnostic testing for HIV that we were able to pivot very rapidly to be able to do large-scale COVID testing. It's exactly the same machines. It's PCR technology we use to measure viral load for HIV. We're now using it for COVID. Similarly, if you take vaccines, take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's based on an adenoviral 26 vector. That vector was developed and is being tested in parallel right now as an HIV vaccine. And we've seen throughout Africa, just take South Africa, we've been involved in 5 different vaccine trials, And all because we have very substantial HIV vaccine trial capacity that pivoted to doing this. So whether it's in research, whether it's in diagnostics, or whether it's in vaccine development, we've seen how all of the capacity built for HIV was now able to pivot and help in the response to COVID-19. I'll ask Adiba to comment because she's got a broader experience in this area as well.
No, I think I actually look in envy, Slim, at the capacity built around HIV in Africa, which I must say is not as advanced in my part of the world. So, as you highlighted, it has benefited in other diseases as well. So we need to look at, as mentioned earlier, where the gaps are and where the council can help fill those gaps up.
Dr. Harold would like to supplement as well.
Well, I just would like to point out something that's probably obvious to everybody on this panel, and that is that while it's very important to take advantage of experience with one application, such as to HIV, to another, but similarly, it's also important to remember that some of the things we're talking about here, the new approaches to vaccines, to testing, are embedded in a deeper, more basic kind of research in which we try to understand how the instructions for building a biological entity like a human being are laid down in our genomes, how we've learned to amplify the DNA using a combination of enzymes and machines, how we've learned to take apart viruses and put them back together to make novel kinds of vaccines. So there's an element here of making use of very fundamental science that hopefully will be practiced throughout the world, but for the moment tends to be focused largely in the most developed countries. And one of our jobs as a council is to be looking out for new developments in fundamental science that could be applied to deep and drastic problems throughout the world that currently don't see the advantages that we hope we can provide by offering examples of places in the world where we're exploiting those new technologies that may emerge from very basic research can be used for the betterment of health.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harold. We also have Professor Abla, who is epidemiologist from Lebanon. Professor Abla, would you like to maybe share some experiences from your work on how science has helped in epidemic crisis and maybe some lessons taken now into pandemic response?
Yes, thank you. So science is expensive. Okay, there's a lot of investment when we want to produce the knowledge. So one message maybe I would like to put over here is that we need to be very efficient in terms of how we use the science and how we use the knowledge and how to translate the knowledge into practice. And over here, sharing of data and sharing of the knowledge and collaboration and twinning between different institutions and between developed and developed countries is truly very, very important. The COVID-19 have told us about the importance of the interdependence between the countries, between research and the complementarities when we talk about science. And it's important to work together in order to have more efficient kind of process for the production of science.
Thank you very much. We also have Professor Marie-Claire joining us here. She is based in USA. So good morning to you. When we started this conversation, we were talking about genetics and technologies that can be used to improve people's health. So how can we use genetic influence on diseases and how we can put it in a practical use?
The way I think of this is really motivated by my first experience in India years and years ago, decades ago. And very early on, every young person in India was walking around with a cell phone. I still had my landline in my home. And it occurred to me, this country has skipped the landlines. And that's what I think we are trying to do here. We are trying to identify technologies that have already skipped the landlines, for which there's absolutely no point in recreating old technology, but situations in which intelligent, well-educated, motivated young scientists can grab new technologies and exploit them for important practical questions of the day. It doesn't in any way mean that new technologies don't need additional development. They do. But if we do our job right, we will have identified situations in which there are platforms that people can move forward with very productively. WHO has so many of these activities in progress already that a great deal of what we may be able to do is to highlight some of the strengths of WHO in a whole variety of areas.
Thank you so much. And do you think that artificial intelligence technologies can also be helpful?
I think it's tempting to use words like artificial intelligence. To be honest, I much more prefer human intelligence. I think what a young investigator can do, armed with enough resources and enough experimental reagents, is just remarkable. Certainly at the level of moving massive amounts of data around, artificial intelligence is terrific. But I think we don't want to lose sight of the prize, which is to bring modern technologies to bear on practical problems.
Thank you so much. Here we have a next question for Professor Edith coming from our viewers. If you could please explain what is epigenetics?
Okay, epigenetics is actually has many definitions. There's one side of the spectrum, which is how the environment impacts on individuals. And so goes beyond genetics. Now, actually, that's not the definition that I like to use. I prefer to use a more conventional definition, which is that it's all changes in the way that our genome is expressed, that are stable and heritable, but that don't involve any actual change in the sequences of our genomes. And so it's actually a topic that is very relevant to many different areas of life because it creates much more diversity than pure genetic changes. So I think in terms of the WHO, epigenetics actually embraces many of the areas that are now at the forefront, going from, trying to help human health at the level of cancer, different predispositions to infectious diseases, right through to understanding how things like climate change are having an impact on the environment, and then how that impacts on life on Earth. So epigenetics is actually a very broad area, and I work on a very specialized part of it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your work so that our viewers can understand this subject a bit better?
Okay, very quickly, my topic of research is actually trying to understand how in women, in females, where there are two X chromosomes, one of the two X chromosomes becomes silenced in order to balance out what we have in males, where they only have one X chromosome and one Y. So these sex chromosomes are a big challenge for dosage. And so in women, one of the two X's gets silenced, and that is an epigenetic change. Basically, the genome, the DNA sequence doesn't change at all, but the whole chromosome is put to silence. And then that's maintained stably throughout life. So that's what I work on. And I've spent more than 25 years trying to understand not only how it happens, but what the implications are, because it turns out that women are much more varied than men because of this X inactivation process, because sometimes we express our paternal X chromosome, sometimes a maternal X chromosome. So there's a lot of interest in, for example, differences in disease susceptibility because of X inactivation.
Thank you so much. This is very interesting, and thank you for explaining it for us. I think I have a next question for all of our panelists. What are some of the major scientific breakthroughs for human health in last years, in your opinion? Maybe Dr. Harold, you would like to start as the chair.
Well, it's a very large question because there have been so many. Indeed, I'd argue that one of the things that we are focused on as a committee already has had a tremendously transforming experience in my own area of interest, namely infectious disease and oncology, cancer research. And that is the development of techniques that allow us to look at individual genes and analyze them in great detail. Those were methods, many of us were born before we actually knew that information in cells was encoded in DNA. And we've watched as we've gone from absolute ignorance to a level of understanding that is remarkable, because we can now announce the complete genetic blueprint of every single organism on this earth simply by carrying out DNA sequencing methods and trying to understand the function of individual genes, which are now displayed in extraordinary detail. And we've learned about mutations that do a variety of things, like what's in the newspaper every day, change the behavior of viruses that are causing dread diseases around the world, to understanding why certain drugs don't work in certain individuals, or why they fail to continue to suppress the growth of cancer cells because the DNA sequence has changed. So I would argue that understanding DNA, how its information is expressed, how it changes during evolution, how its expression changes as a result of some of the epigenetic events that Edith was talking about, represent a fundamental advance that is of great proportion. But I will defer to others to describe other things that have happened over the last decade or two.
Thank you so much. The next one on my screen is Dr. Salim. So what is the biggest science breakthrough for health in past years for you?
Well, I'll just touch on infectious diseases. And in my view, I think the two big discoveries in the last decade have focused around initially an antiretroviral treatment for HIV, where treatment was found to be effective not only in suppressing the virus, but also effective in preventing its onward transmission. So the value of antiretroviral treatment in saving lives and creating longevity, as well as enhancing prevention, was really a major scientific contribution to one of the world's biggest health problems. And then, if I can add a second point, I think we've seen just amazing progress in the field of vaccines. We now have a vaccine for Ebola. We now have a vaccine for malaria. Admittedly, the malaria vaccine is not that good, but there's another one that's just coming in line pretty soon. That's looks much better. And of course, we have an amazing vaccine and a set of vaccines for COVID-19. So I think what we're seeing is the whole vaccine field moving forward in leaps and bounds and opening up the door that may help us move much faster on an HIV vaccine as well.
I would like to come. I would like to come in here. Yes, for me, two big things in the past couple of years, or maybe almost a decade. One is, of course, gene editing, the ability to be able to edit genes, and then not just microorganisms, but plants and animals, including people. And this really, although it's a wonderful achievement, it really creates a lot of moral and ethical problems that we still have to solve, before we go on further, because we cannot really go and edit genes of people without knowing whether it will have lasting effects on the future generations or not. So it's not a problem just for science, but it's a problem for ethics as well. So that's number one. Number two, I think this is neurotechnology. We have really made many good advances in understanding how the neural system works, and in using them in various diseases, neural diseases and other diseases, and also in learning and understanding how people can learn, and various changes that go on when people learn and when dementia occurs. So this is something that is very exciting, and in the next few years, I think we should see a lot of applications. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Adiba, what would be your answer?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's going to revolutionize, or that has already revolutionized healthcare, is digital technology. Like we're utilizing it right now. This is, important for expanding access to rural areas, for instance, where there aren't enough specialists to provide, specialist care. So having, like what Dr. King explained, in India, everyone carries a mobile phone. I think this is really telemedicine in the age of COVID-19. Will provide, hopefully, the much needed impetus for all of us to move to telemedicine that everyone has been trying to for decades, but now COVID-19 has forced us to do that, and hopefully will become part and parcel of the healthcare delivery system. So I think digital technology will improve healthcare in leaps and bounds, not just from an AI point of view, but capacity building, knowledge dissemination. But on the flip side, as we know from the vaccine, anti-vaccine movement and disinformation and misinformation with COVID-19, it's something that we also need to watch out for and have the ability to combat all that through misinformation through social media.
Thank you so much. Professor Edith or Marie-Claire or Abla or Dr. Soumya, would you like to take a floor, please?
Well, I could say a very quick word. I think there's clearly been a revolution in, for example, using immune therapies. So, there are so many cancers that we can now treat. So I think that's one area that's completely exploded in the last 10 years. The question is, how relevant will that be to the whole world? It's only us privileged people who can actually have access to this. And I think this is, for me, the key. Maybe we should be going more towards understanding diseases like cancer in a sort of precision way, but for the whole world. And we really have the tools now, the decades of research that have gone into bringing us genomics or allowing us to create vaccines. There's so much research, so much knowledge now that we can use. And I really feel that we should be bringing some of these incredible therapies to the rest of the world. So I have hope that with the WHO, we will be able to sort of expand and help the world with these sorts of approaches.
Thank you so much. I think this is the moment when we all need hope as we are in this global crisis, but also hope for other health conditions that are affecting many people around the world. And you're rightly saying that access to these tools and scientific knowledge is actually important to reach those people in need. There is a question actually coming from our viewer, and maybe Dr. Soumya, you can take this one. When is the Science Council meeting again, and what will be the next steps of your work?
So obviously there's a lot of interest, and we're very keen also that the Science Council works in a way closely with WHO to really advance all of these topics that we've been talking about. But I think we're going to focus, the Science Council debated about this today and decided that perhaps they would focus on genomic technologies, because that has a breadth of influence across diagnosis, prevention, and treatment, but also across many disease areas. And you can't think of any area now currently where genomic technology could not have a bigger impact. And of course, we have to think about access and affordability. And as we said earlier, we have to think about taking technologies to where the health problems are to solve them. So if it's going into an urban slum in a big city in Asia or Latin America and using genomics to test the sewage water to see what pathogens are circulating, or to set up surveillance systems to see if diseases which we think we don't have are re-emerging again, or whether it's being used to, Dr. Mary Claire King's work is to identify people at high risk for particular kinds of cancer so that you can then take preventive action. And so it has a huge scope, but its full potential has not been realized in most parts of the world. So probably that's going to be the focus, and the Science Council is very keen to continue their work and not even wait for formal meetings. So I think we'll be having a lot of smaller group discussions, and possibly the next meeting in June or July to come together again to make more concrete the ideas that we would then like to pursue. But I think the area of genomics is clearly emerging as something that has also become very important during the pandemic, but has applications way beyond surveillance of pathogens.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soumya. And the question that we quite often get from our viewers on social media is, how can we use the science and knowledge we have now to avoid next pandemic from happening? Dr. Salim, maybe you would want to start with this one?
Yes, sure. I think we've already started talking about this very issue at the Science Council meeting today. And Soumya has touched on this, which is, if we are to be well prepared for the future pandemics, an initial first step is to be able to rapidly identify it. And so establishing surveillance, ensuring we're using the latest technologies, that we're approaching it from a One Health perspective, where we're looking at animal and human pathogens and their potential to spread and into a pandemic. I think all of those feature in this discussion. So I think we're going to see many new discussions and much consolidation of our existing technologies and capabilities to enhance our preparedness for the next set of pandemics.
I would like to add, Yongyut here, I would like to add to Dr. Abdul Karim that in addition to surveillance, we also have to be aware of various things that may contribute to next pandemics. We need to be aware of the environment, the ecology, and not just people, but the whole of nature. It could well be that climate change and other causes will contribute to the next pandemic. We don't know. And social factors are also very important. How people live and interact with one another, their occupation. These are all factors which influence the status of health. So these factors can be important in the emergence of new pandemics. We should develop a kind of a science of pandemics preparedness and disease preparedness in the future.
Thank you so much. Maybe before we close, as we have a couple of minutes left, I will ask Professor Marie-Claire, as the question is coming from the audience for all, but I would start maybe with you. What was your motivation when you decided to study and work in science?
I think for me, as a young girl who was a child before the space age and didn't have any clue what a scientist did, as I continued in school and learned more and more about what science could do, and ultimately took a course from a fabulous geneticist named Dr. Kurt Stern, the last time he taught it, the idea of being able to solve puzzles, the kinds of questions that people have been asking since people began to ask questions, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and now to be able to answer them with logic and with tools was irresistibly appealing. And the fact that this very distinguished teacher was so encouraging of me as a young student just made all the difference. And I began to do genetics, and I have never looked back.
Thank you so much. I would open the floor for other panelists as well to share the motivation to study and work in science.
I may?
Please, Professor
For
Abdul.
For me, science has been always from one question to the other. It's like a search and then research. And with each step, there was always second questions to be answered. And it somehow fit together like a tapestry of many threads. As our colleague had just mentioned, it's like a puzzle, and you have the joy when you find the solution, or you find some results and findings from the science.
Thank you so much, Professor Abla. Maybe I would give the floor to Professor Adiba next.
Yeah, I think not specifically science, but I went into medicine and then later on went into research because I just enjoy working with people as opposed to numbers. And so that was what attracted me to medicine, I guess. And from there, as I trained in medicine, just looking after patients alone, I felt wasn't enough, and that research, medical research, clinical research is very important to improve patient care. And I think that is what that continues to motivate me to do research as opposed to just being a pure clinician.
Thank you so much. And Professor Edith, what was your motivation?
Yes, so I actually wanted to do astronomy when I went to university. I'd never done any biology before I went to university. And when I got there, and there was some amazing geneticists actually who inspired me, I realized that rather than gazing at the stars, life is so beautiful and so complex. So I did become fascinated by just trying to understand how living organisms work. And this was just before the time of genomics and all these amazing technologies we have now. And yet we could do so much. So it was this exploration of the diversity of life that got me into it. And I think we're very lucky because in biology, we are constantly living revolutions and advances. And again, this pandemic has shown us it's incredible how quickly we came up with a vaccine. I mean, this even a few decades ago, that was unimaginable. And here we are. So yes, the beauty of life on Earth, that's what got me into it.
Thank you so much. This is very interesting story. As we're having ladies first here, I would give the floor to Dr. Soumya next, our chief scientist.
For me also, it was the curiosity of trying to understand why certain things are happening. And I actually wanted to be a geneticist. First, I wanted to be a veterinarian, then I wanted to be a geneticist. And then I ended up in medical school and really enjoyed clinical care. But as Adiba said, I thought it was not enough to just see patients and just treat as you've been taught how to treat. I always wanted to find out more, why certain things are happening. And I think that's an area which we need to focus on more, especially in many countries around the world. Our teaching of medicine, of life sciences needs to encourage people to ask the question why, and not just take for granted what's written in the textbooks and what we are taught. And so I really started enjoying research as part of my clinical career, and then focused much more of my time to doing research. A disease like tuberculosis, which has been there for, thousands of years. It's been found in Egyptian mummies. So Mycobacterium tuberculosis is a pathogen that humanity has lived with, and it still kills 1.5 million people every year. And yet we haven't found a vaccine, we haven't found drugs, because we don't understand this organism. We don't understand the immune response yet. So there are still many, many questions for diseases that kill a lot of people every year that we need to continue the research on. So that keeps me motivated.
Thank you so much. Dr. Young-Youth, what was a driver for you to start studying genetic engineering and biotechnology?
Well, I think science attracts a lot of people, including me, naturally. It came to me naturally. Back when I was a child, all things seemed so interesting. I would like to know more. However, it requires hard work and discipline. And I think many people cannot really kind of stay with it, and attempt to understand the detail. So many people leave science, but all children are very fascinated by science and all things in nature. I think you need discipline, and for me, I need to do some other things as well, not just science. So I cannot be, with science all the time. I really need to talk to people and listen to music and do various things as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, the scientists are doing other things as well, not just the research. Dr. Salim, the floor is yours.
I have to go.
So I think about why I went into science is actually more like who got me into science, because I was heavily influenced by my high school physics teacher. He stimulated curiosity in me that I just never really grasped until I went to high school and came under his tutelage. But when I finished high school, I wanted to go and study engineering, but I was too poor and I couldn't afford it. But I got a scholarship to go and study medicine. So I became a doctor by accident. But one of the most exciting things was when I was in medical school, I was mentored by a professor of pediatrics. And he taught me about rigor, and he taught me about excellence, and he taught me about how curiosity and imagination is fundamental to good science. And so I have many people along the way to thank for where I've come to. And I think all of them contributed in their own way to the eventual final product today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Harold needs to leave us shortly, so I will give him the floor as the chair to close this session.
Well, I'll be very brief, but my own path was somewhat different. I began my intellectual life as a future professor of English literature, but along the way, I decided that I had to have some element of public benefit in my work. I just chose to go to medical school to become a psychiatrist. Didn't like that very much. Then was obligated by the Vietnam War to serve my country, and I served my country by doing research at the NIH, where I learned the powers of science. I had at medical school gone to India with the aspirations of helping people with current technologies, found them inadequate, and decided, based on my experience at NIH, to spend my life working on basic biological problems that I thought needed to be solved if we were going to advance global health. That is what I think this committee should be doing. Our aspirations is to harness basic science, view the applications in a productive way, and think about how we can make the products of science accessible to everyone and contributed to by all nations. With that, I must depart. Thank you very much, Alex, for running this session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harold. And I thank all our panelists and scientists, not only for joining this session, but for working with WHO and for committing to help us to bring science and scientific solutions closer to people around the world. We've received a lot of positive feedback on that this was very informative and inspirational conversation. So thank you. We look forward to learn more from you and to hear more from you. I will just name a few countries that people were watching us from, starting from Sri Lanka, India, the US, Indonesia, Portugal, Uruguay, Bangladesh, Tajikistan, Argentina, Malaysia, Burkina Faso, Saudi Arabia, Iceland, Nigeria, Egypt, Philippines, Colombia, Cameroon, and many more. So as we started this conversation that science knows no nations, we've had panelists from all over the world, but we also had people watching us from all over the world and listening what are the greatest scientific achievements, but also what more is to come in future. Thank you so much, and I wish you a good day.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.